Let's get to it. This conversation is of national importance. The lights keep going off, and we keep hearing different stories. But listen, what's going on? Benjamin Boakye joins us. He's the Executive Director at the Africa Center for Energy Policy. That's ACEP to you and I. John Jinapor is also on the line. He's a ranking member in Parliament's Mines and Energy Committee. Gentlemen, good morning to you both, and thanks for your time with us.
Good morning, Kojo, and thanks for having us. Good morning, Honorable.
All right. If it's all right, I would like to start with you, Ben. Look, load is being shed. Am I right or wrong?
No, you're perfectly right. Load is being shed, particularly during the peak hours. There are some significant loads that are shed.
So what's the difficulty here? Why do we keep hearing conflicting stories, and why is it so hard for us to get organized about this, since we are all affected?
I think it's the challenge you have. I have the same. The light to go off is visible. It's not, an invisible event. So people will see their light off. And so to struggle to say that the light has gone off and this is the exact reason why it's gone off. We have Ghanaians working in those institutions. You may want to cover up, you may want to douse, the truth, but it will eventually come out. We live with them. They are brothers, our sisters in the space. So I don't see why, when the truth is there, we try to manage the truth. Let me give you some statistics. Just this month, on the 2nd of February, the total shortfall was about 530 megawatts. So we cut exports and reduced it to 180. 14th of February, we had 390 shortfall. We cut export and reduced it to 190. On 16th of February, we had 360 megawatt shortfall, and we shed 110. On 19th, it was 570 megawatts, and we shed 360 megawatts. 20th, we were supposed to shed 600. We cut export and did 450 megawatts. 21st, we were supposed to do 430. We cut export and did 280. On 22nd, we were supposed to shed 630 megawatts. We cut export and we did 480 megawatts. 26th, which was just Monday, we were supposed to do 270. We cut export and we did about 120 megawatt load shed. 27th, we were supposed to do 480. We did 330. Yesterday was supposed to be about 530. We did 380 megawatts. So this is not an event. It's been recurrent. It's been going on. And we just need to know, public need to know what is going to happen to them in the evening, plan their lives, and be able to adjust. I think that is all there is at this point. When you clearly know that you don't have enough fuel, some of the plants are down. TICO has been down for some time now. You should know, working with engineers, when the timelines look like for them to come back on stream. You know that you don't have fuel, liquid fuel, to be able to bring on some of the other generators like AXA, who are sitting there and happily taking revenues. So tell us what the timelines look like. Let people plan their lives.
Okay.
And that's all there is.
Now, Benjamin Boakye, you've talked about the fact that we have these shortfalls. We also do know that we have excess capacity. In fact, we've talked about the reserves in times past. But you've made another point that we don't have fuel. Is this a money problem?
It's money. Because if you go and buy fuel, you need money to be able to do that. And beyond money, also, there's a management crisis in the sector. And that is why people are happy to explain the problem and not how we manage the energy sector, the power sector, as a system. Because if you have a system, you have generation, transmission, and distribution, you always have to make sure that all of them are working right. And if one is not working, the system collapses. The system doesn't send the power to the consumer. You need all of them to work in at the same time. And how do you manage all of these things to make sure that you can have fuel available, you can have generation available, you can have the transmission working right, and then you can have the distribution also working right? We haven't been able to figure it out. And that has been the challenge for all of us. I mean, if you take the generation, for example, we have been complaining about excess capacity for all these years, and suddenly you are told we don't have enough generating capacity to be able to serve our needs. Where is the effort? All right. Sometimes you hear the transmission has gone down because we do know what the problem is. If Greco is not investing to retool their systems, they are not investing to expand. Because new houses are being built, new businesses are coming up, the demand is going up, and you always have to keep up your investment to be able to, sustain the grid. If that investment is not happening, you always have challenges, and the trips will keep happening. All right, and they don't get the money to be able to sustain investment in the grid. Now we are also seeing that they are cutting exports, which is actually sustaining the state institutions. If they are not exporting, then they don't have money because ECG doesn't pay them. So it is the export revenue that they use to pay salaries and survive. And now that export revenue is not there because there's shortfall and they have to cut exports and meet domestic demand. So they don't have money. The cash flow is impacted. And that would affect Greco and VRA even worse because they're not going to get the revenue they need to be able to be as functional as we need them to be. And that is a big problem. And when it comes to the collection on the ECG side, it is still terrible. They are not collecting enough. What they collect, they don't account properly. We're supposed to have cash waterfall mechanism that brings everything to the table for us to know how much has been collected. And then a formula is produced for us to share at least whatever comes in for everybody to benefit. They don't do it.
Yeah.
Right? They're not paying them. So then the problem persists. And that is what has brought us where we are today.
Yeah. Right. John Jinapor is also on the line. Mr. Jinapor, some aspects of this thing are a bit confusing. I mean, as a country, we're told we have excess capacity, and then suddenly we were unable to produce enough, and we are exporting electricity, but we're cutting power within our borders. How are we so inconsistent in the delivery of power?
Well, so that should tell you that this whole narrative about so much excess capacity, we ought to be careful with that, especially when some of your plants are very, very old. So like Ben said, Tico, Tapco, barely are stable. And the two plants, you're talking of close to like 600 megawatts. That's a huge quantum of power when you lose that. Secondly, is the issue of fuel, and that fuel is financial. If government can mobilize some money urgently and buy some heavy fuel oil, KTPP and AXA can run, and that will lessen the burden. So it's a technical issue, it's also a financial issue, and a managerial issue. Why government decided to relocate Ameri to Kumasi at this point beats my imagination. Because if Ameri was available, being a modular plant, it means that even with limited gas, you can fire some of the plants. But I'm very, very worried about a new development. The foreign market is a lucrative market for Ghana and VRA in particular. We export power to Togo, to Burkina, and to Cote d'Ivoire. Now, for almost 1 month now, we've been scaling back supply to these countries. What it means is that they will begin to take some corrective measures and adapt. So we are likely to lose that lucrative market. And don't forget, we took a huge facility from Agence France Développement to upgrade our transmission line from 161 to 330 kVA in order to export power. And repayment of that huge facility is contingent on power that we export. We are gradually losing that market. And that's a very competitive market. And I'm very, very worried about that. The third one has to do with communication. It's not as if you're having intermittent power supply challenges. For about a month now, 2nd February to date, the power has been very erratic. They've been shedding load. And in this modern era, you can't keep such information to yourself forever. So I think that the managers of the system should be honest, should be candid, tell Ghanaians the challenge, show Ghanaians how they intend dealing with the challenge, and allow people to plan their lives. This is not a political issue. I don't even want us to politicize it. People need to plan their lives. If I wouldn't have electricity this evening, I can probably do my ironing and cooking this afternoon, so that in the evening I can adjust. But this self-denial and insisting that there's no load shedding when you can see visibly, or once you shed above 200, 300, it becomes so visible. You can no longer deceive the people. And we get the reports every day from the systems control room. So I think that the managers of the power sector should be candid. They should open up, and let's all see how we can resolve this situation going forward. I think that is the best way forward.
Let me ask about the contradiction between the account of PURC and ECG. PURC suggests that there's a fuel issue. We're not getting the fuel to power these generators. But Mr. Dubik Mahama says, no, there are some cabling problems that are being resolved.
Where? Cabling problems where? Is this cabling problems where?
I'm not certain of the locations.
I mean, cabling problems do not lead to a deficit in generation. We're talking of a generation deficit, not a transmission or distribution challenge. ECG might have their own cabling problem at the distribution end. That's the function of Mr. Dubik. His job is not to generate, and I'll plead with him not to descend into that errand. There's a generation deficit. Let's deal with that first. If you don't have enough generation, you cannot even talk about distribution. So let's address the current deficit in generation. Is it a fuel challenge? Is it a technical challenge? Is it a gas challenge? A heavy fuel challenge? Or is it because we owe some people, we are not able to pay, and so they are not supplying the fuel?
Okay.
Let's address that first. So please, Mr. Dubik, don't do that. It's a serious matter. We're talking of a technical matter. It's not an opinion. If the fuel is not available, it's not available. How can we find regular supply of fuel for the plants to ensure that there's sustainable power? But more importantly, like I'm saying, how can we quickly restore supply to these neighboring countries where we earn hard foreign exchange? It's an important, lucrative market that we dare not lose. If we lose that market, it means the power supply here will have to be very, very expensive.
I mean, Mr. Jinapor, you've talked about having, a technical problem and a fuel problem, which you say is financial. What's the difficulty here? I mean, why is it, as a ranking member, why is it difficult for us to buy fuel and power these plants?
First of all, if ECG sells power and they lose about 30%, from day one, there's a huge deficit. That's a fact. And if you ask Ben, he's been in this sector for a while, he can confirm to you that the losses are rising. And if you don't deal with the losses, with the managerial stroke technical issue that we're all talking about, the ATCC is rising. Hello?
Yeah, yes, we're listening. Yes.
Yeah, that is one. Two, it's even equitable distribution of the revenues from the cash waterfall mechanism. They are not adhering to the cash waterfall mechanism. So it's creating unnecessary bottlenecks. And once you have these bottlenecks, there's inconsistency, you don't have certainty, you don't have predictability, and so you are unable to plan. And I think that is the immediate thing we should be looking at. There are long-term issues. Like when we're doing light crude oil, we decided that we should do gas. And so today, gas has reduced the cost of generation. But there are issues that we can tackle immediately. Let's deal with those ones. Restore the cash waterfall mechanism, ensure that there's equitable distribution. Where there's a shortfall, the government must step in. That is why we have government. Okay. Electricity is not necessarily a profit-making venture. It has a social component. So that at least we can have reliable supply of power. So for me, that is where all of us ought to be looking at.
Great.
So that we can reduce the losses to the barest minimum and ensure that there's fairness and there's equity. At least that will keep the cash flow moving. And then finally, the energy sector levies ought to be used for their intended purpose. I've been reading the reports, and the previous minister kept borrowing from that fund and using it for non-energy sector related expenditure. That is not good enough. And we've brought this to the attention of the IMF. It's been captured in the Extended Credit Facility Agreement. I hope that that will be restructured so that the energy sector can have some breather whilst avoiding further losses.
Okay. Before I bring Ben Boakye in, Mr. Jinapor, you talked about the relocating of Ameri and why it's not suitable this time. What's wrong with that?
Because if Ameri was available today, you would deal with the deficit. There were two options. Either you upgrade the transmission network and keep Ameri where it is, or you embed it in Kumasi. So I thought that even if they were doing that, it should have been done in phases. There are about 6 units, so you could move 2 and keep 4 and continue to run the 4. But they've brought all the 6 down. They've brought all the 6 down and doing some movements here and there. Unlike Tico, where when you lose just 1 unit, you lose 150 megawatts. Ameri, I think Ameri is about 10 units. If you can correct me.
Yeah, they're 10 units.
Yes, it's 10
Yeah,
units.
they're 10 units. So if you lose 1 unit, you are losing just 25, which means that other units can run. Even when the gas level is low, you can scale back and run some few. In this business where you have a deficit, what you do is to try and close the deficit as much as you can. But when you bring all the units down, today you're having a major challenge. Tico is down, and the downside is that there may even be stranded gas, because some gas may be available and you don't even have a plan to offtake it. So you'll be paying capacity charge for the thermal plant and also paying capacity charge for the gas plant. So it takes a lot of thinking, a lot of planning, modeling and scheduling, and looking at all the scenarios before you decide to do the things they are doing. That is my opinion, though. But let others also express their opinion.
So let me bring in Ben Boakye. Before you talk about that, Ben Boakye, we know over the past year we've seen increases in electricity tariffs, for instance. We're talking about collection now. All of these, and we're talking about losses. These losses are also used as part of calculating how much we have to pay, for instance, and the tariffs, for instance. So why should there be a problem? Even though we have a lot of losses, why shouldn't ECG be able to collect enough? Are we not paying enough for them to be able to fund all the operations?
Yeah, I think it's the losses. You have the technical, you have the commercial losses, and also the collection. So it's grown, to about 30% from around 23% when we wanted to privatize the collection or the distribution end of the value chain. So what that means is that when you give ECG about $1 million of power, about 300,000 cannot be accounted for, which is quite staggering. And beyond that also, when they are able to bill for the 70%, they can't also collect all the money. Some will be in debt, and they will not be able to collect those revenues. And that also compounds the whole situation. And then when they have collected also, they just focus more on themselves rather than making sure that everybody else in the value chain at least get a fair share of what has been collected for the system to be sustainable. Because if you distribute, somebody has to generate and somebody has to...
Hold on 1 minute there. Let me just get a clarification here. So ECG, as part of the cash waterfall mechanism, would collect and share with others based on a sharing mechanism. You're saying when they collect, they focus on themselves and do not share with the others?
So that is one of the big problems that we have at this point. Because they are the ones who see the money. Greco will not see money. VRA and the other IPPs will not see money. It's ECG that collects the money. They interface with the consumer. All right. So when they have taken power from the generators through the transmission system, they collect the money and they decide to focus more on themselves before they take care of others. And that's why we brought in the cash waterfall mechanism to at least address that problem, so that whatever comes into the port is shared for the transmitters, the generators, to at least get a fair share of the revenue and be able to continue producing whilst we address the other inefficiencies and challenges that we do have in the sector. So that is one huge problem that we do have. On the generation side, I think I want to talk a bit more on that briefly. Okay. Remember when this Ameri issue came up and we told government that the optimal decision was to keep Ameri where it is and improve the transmission infrastructure. Because even when you send the power plant to Kumasi and the transmission system is not functional or it's not working, you wouldn't have any use for it. And there are options to deal with problems or system losses and the rest of it. If you bump up the transmission infrastructure and have a bigger cable, you are able to reduce the inefficiency. And GRICO has a master plan that shows the investment requirement, where even the Kumasi to Accra to Kumasi transmission line was budgeted around $70 million. And we're going to use that $70 million to relocate America. So if you relocate it and you don't have it available, you still have the same problems. All right? And you have aged plants also in the Western Corridor that need support. And we just didn't listen to anybody. At one point, the minister was saying that we had Kumasi people, and that is why we didn't want them to relocate the plant to Kumasi. And for almost 2 years now, we've been trying to relocate when we need power plants to generate power today. And the plant was available in Takoradi to just always, sell power to the grid and utilize the gas that is being produced in the Western Enclave. All right. So these are some of the terrible decisions that we try as much as we can to guide policymakers to avoid, so that we can focus on systemic thinking and, addressing the problems that are confronting the energy sector. But procurement drives everything, and not what the right thing is to be done.
Mr. Jinapor, I think we'll wrap up with you, and I mean it is an attempt to look into the future here. The money part of this problem is a big issue. Currently, any gains government is making macroeconomically is basically down to the fact that they've either stopped or reduced the payment of their bills. So
my worry is that we risk running the whole energy sector aground. So it looks like government is doing what I call palliative management of the energy sector. And so whoever assumes office in 2025 would have a huge task. The reports I read indicate that the plants are getting obsolete. They are not being replaced according to schedule. Maintenance is not being carried out regularly. Upgrading is virtually zilch. And even the fuel that we need now to run the plants, government is unable to procure that fuel for the energy sector. So we have a huge problem. Immediately, government should prioritize. Let's get some fuel and get these dual fuel plants running. Then we can deal with the others. At least that's for buying fuel. It's money. You don't need any other thing. Let government look for some money, prioritize, cut back expenditure on some areas, and let's get some power for the economy to run. Other than that, eventually, the economy can go into a recession, and the consequence can be very, very dire. And then finally, look, when we have challenges, every government, not just this government, let's be candid to the people of Ghana. Let's tell them we have this challenge, we are dealing with it, and let's inform them to plan their lives. It's not rocket science. Living in self-denial is not the solution. And I think that you, the media, you are doing a good job for bringing this up. Let's take it up and get them to speak to it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks to Mr. John Jinapor, Ranking Member on Parliament's Mines and Energy Committee, and of course Benjamin Boakye, Executive Director at Africa Center for Energy Policy, ACEP. Thanks to both of you.